Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted, the podcast for those who are done performing, done people pleasing, and done living life on autopilot. I'm your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor, and this is where we create disruptive, unapologetic transformations for those who are ready to exit survival mode and reclaim their power. Every episode is your permission slip to burn the rule book, break the cycle, and finally build a life that feels like yours. So let's disrupt everything that's holding you back and start living life on your own terms. Welcome to Survival Mode Disrupted. This is your trigger warning. This podcast contains unfiltered conversations about trauma, abuse, and survival. Discretion is advised. This is not therapy or medical advice, just real people sharing real stories. So please take care of yourself and pause if you need to. If this conversation hits home, grab the book Survival Mode Exit Plan, your raw, unapologetic blueprint to break free. Available now by scanning the QR code or clicking the link in the comments. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. It's your host, Letitia, the Survival Mode Disruptor. And today we have Daria. Daria, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. So, I'm Daria. I'm a somatic manifestation coach, and I'm here to really just share my life journey of survival mode, which has been pretty much my whole life up until about a year ago. So, yeah, I'm here to share that and to share that life can look differently. And thank you, Letitia, for doing your wonderful work of bringing this out into the world. It's so important to share the voices of people like myself to really give more hope to the world that we can live differently. So, yes, thank you so much.
You are very welcome. So tell us your story.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, honestly, up until about a year ago, my whole life has been survival mode, like right from the get-go. Um, Even coming into the world, I came in a month early, so my mum was having difficulties with her health during pregnancy. So they had to induce labor. And as we now know, a lot of even back then, that can already impact your nervous system and your whole health, even from that outset. So even coming into the world, I was very much already, I would like to call a sensitive soul. So I was very much quite a sensitive in terms of my nervous system. And then shortly after my birth, the situation with my parents, well, there was a difficult situation happening with my dad, I should say. So he, well, probably already had schizophrenia for a while, but it came in that he got very severely ill about a year into my birth. So he was very unwell. And this obviously had a huge impact on my whole family and what was going on around me. So I assume, like, to be honest, I didn't ask too much, but I assumed that there was so much stress around. Again, as a baby, your nervous system attunes to your environment, to the people around you. So again, my system was already quite sensitive and kind of looking out for danger and trying to, like, pick up on cues as much as possible, even back then. And also, I should mention, I'm originally from Russia, so a very different culture to where I am now, which also played a massive role on how then I was treated and, being brought up. So after that happened, my mum pretty much had to flee the situation with me and go to stay with her parents because my dad was like extremely unwell. So following that, I spent a few years living with my mum, and then there was a decision made that I would then go and stay with my grandparents for whatever reason. To be honest, now we've had many discussions, it's not super clear why it happened, but either way, again, as my child self, which was, maybe like 6.5 years old back then, I very much felt abandoned again by sort of my parental situation where I was then moving to live with my grandparents in a different city to the one I was used to living with my mum. So again, there was a lot of stress going on within my system, and I guess, I mean, no one really asked whether that was normal or not, because, well, things just kind of got done. So yeah, I moved to live with my grandparents, and I started to get quite severe health conditions. So I couldn't really eat properly. I at one point was like hospitalized, and they were trying to do all sorts of tests to sort of figure out what was wrong with me. Like, I had like severe stomach aches. Like, I would wake up in the night, like in severe pain, screaming. Like, I think they call it like celiac pain, or it's like coming and ongoing pains. And yeah, no one could really figure out what was wrong with me. And again, now looking back, I very much can see clearly that it's to do with a lot of stress, to do with a lot of abandonment, not being sure where I'm at. And also when at that age, I think a lot of survival mode came from not only sort of trying to understand why I was being moved around a lot and trying not to lose my connections to my caregivers, but even within the culture, there was this huge sense of perfectionism that came into play. So, whilst I was already trying to be perfect to make sure that I wouldn't get abandoned again, there's this whole culture around being the best and like doing the absolute best, being your perfect thing, getting the grades you need to get. So it was like all joy kind of got sucked out of me, I will say. So even activities after school like dance or sewing or art that I used to do, there was so much pressure to do it in a certain way, which really just took that creativity and joy out of just everyday things or activities that should be pleasurable for a child. I just ended up seeing them as another challenge that I had to be good at. So that again, that survival mode was pretty much in all areas of my life. So not only in school and within my relationships, but also even in activities that were meant to be fun or playful. So I felt like I had very little room to actually like enjoy life at that time. Yeah, so heavy sort of emotions back then on just trying to achieve and be the best and striving for that. And I felt like I didn't really have a lot of nurture or support around me because again, as much as my grandparents always wanted the best for me, they're definitely from the generation of war, from the generation of not being able to connect with people on a warmth, nurturing level that a child needs. So yeah, I felt very much alone and very much stuck in my own shell. I spent a lot of nights, crying on the windowsill, waiting for my mum to come and visit, like every weekend or so, and that was quite difficult memories to look back at now, to be honest. But yeah, so following that, my mum met a new man who was from abroad. So I think for her, the ambition was always to, find a family for me, for her, so we can like live together again. So there was this huge promise of moving to a new country with this new man who, was meant to be the father figure that I didn't have in my life, was meant to be that role model, was meant to provide that stable support system for me. And that's not how it turned out. So we not only was the move itself also difficult because that's like another thing that was not very constant in my life. So it was like another thing where I got dragged into another situation that I had no control over, losing any sense of stability that I had to the situation I was in, which was already little. So that stability got shifted again and moving to England. Obviously, I didn't know anyone, so that was a very lonely experience. So the feelings of loneliness definitely carried on. And then being here, as soon as we kind of arrived, it's like there was this feeling that something's off. Like I felt trapped, but I kind of just put it down to being in a new country, not speaking the language, not knowing anyone, being in the house, trying to learn the language. I kind of put it down to like, okay, maybe this is just for a while, this is how I feel. Like I just feel trapped here. And once like my life moves on and I go to like school here and I learn the language, that it will change. But that's not really how it turned out. Like that feeling of entrapment carried on. So I did end up shortly, I think after about a year of learning the language. This at this point I'm about 11 years old. So I went to secondary school here, and my younger brother was also born. So this is from my stepdad. So it's now me, my mum, my stepdad, and my brother. of four of us, and things just went downhill. I don't know if it was quickly or not, to be honest. I have very little memories of that time because, I mean, I guess that's how, trauma works, as they talk about now. It was just, it's hard to put into words, but I felt completely trapped. I felt like I couldn't say anything because I was so scared of saying the wrong thing because I would be like verbally abused. I would be scrutinized. I felt completely uncomfortable to be myself at all. And it was a similar situation in school as well. Like in England, I felt very unsafe going into school because of like bullying and this whole in-group, out-group situation, which happens a lot in these schools here. I don't know how it is now. I hope it's improved, but it was not very good when I was there at that time. So there was this real sense of unsafety going into school, and there was this real sense of unsafety going home. So it was like wherever I was at, I felt like I was in hell. Like I just wanted to disappear, to be honest. I remember this severe feeling of just wanting to disappear or find my little bubble where I felt like I could just be curl up and just so no one could touch me. So yeah, there was a lot going on at school. There was a lot going on at home where I felt like I was treading on eggshells. And then I quickly tended towards coping mechanisms of alcohol and drugs, sexual promiscuity from a very young age, because, very quickly needed to find a way out of the feelings I was having on the emotions I couldn't bear. The only way to numb out was I found those ways. So, I mean, I think I started drinking from like the age of 12 or something ridiculous. So, yeah, and it kind of progressively got worse and worse. The more things happened in my life, the more I wanted to forget. So, not only was I forgetting because of the trauma, but I was also forgetting because of the numbness and the blackouts I was giving myself on purpose. So, well, unconsciously, but yeah. And these patterns carried out throughout my adolescence. And then my stepdad's behavior progressively got worse to a point where, he was a lot more threatening and violent and aggressive. And it got to a point where I remember like getting a call from my mum at one point where I was like out with my friend at a birthday party, and she sent a text like, "You need to come home. I think he's going to murder us. Like, I'm really scared." And I just remember coming back in a rush and just being up all night, basically, like ready to call the police all night, just like super worried and, feeling extremely unsafe. And not only unsafe for myself, but for my mum and my younger brother. Because to be honest, a lot of why I think I didn't actually act out as much as maybe I could have in front of my stepdad is because of these feelings of I wanted things to work out for them. Like, I think I suppressed myself so much because I felt the guilt of if I did something wrong, then it would reflect on them, and I didn't want them to be in pain or in hurt, and I didn't want them to like, didn't want to ruin their family, almost is how I felt. So I had to suppress myself a lot. I had to hold back a lot of how I felt, of what I said. So I never really said anything, and I still got the end of it. I still got all that anger and aggression towards me, even though I never said anything. So it was like a situation of no matter what I did, there was no winning. Like it was either way, I was going to be beaten down and abused, and not always in a physical sense, but it just in general. And yeah, so his behavior got to a point where we were so worried about him, like psychologically, like he would spend hours like locked up in his sort of space, pretty much like screaming and like, playing like severe loud music and whatever else. Like I won't delve into it, but it was very concerning in terms of his mental health. And my mom was really trying to help him and get him help with seeing the doctors and everything, but he wasn't very compliant or didn't really want the help, I guess. So my mom ended up trying to seek support at a charity because she was also very dependent on him at that time financially. Like he didn't really let her have friends or like really work or anything like that. So it was like a very big entrapment where we all depended on him for a lot of things. And obviously being in a different country as well, with no family here, like she also felt like there wasn't much she could do. So we ended up going to a charity which does help people in a position like that. And what happened was he actually somehow ended up finding like a little list or list of things that she wrote down to bring with her to ask, because like her language wasn't very good, and like anyway she wanted to like have it with her, and he like went through her belongings, ended up finding it, And one of the points was that like my daughter is scared of my husband, so talking about me. And when he saw that, he then confronted me saying, like, are you scared of me? And I mean, this is probably the only time I actually, like, spoke the truth to him. And I said yes, because, well, I was. And, I think I was about 17 at that time. And he was like, okay, well, then you can get out. So, and at that point, this is where, honestly, like, I've never felt such heart-shattering pain. Like, my whole heart just exploded, where I was like, wow. At that point, I also yeah, it was a very difficult moment for me where I felt like I did everything to try and keep it together for my family, and no matter what I did, it was still going to end up the same way. And yeah, so I got kicked out, and I honestly can't really remember too much of what even happened at that point, but I know that my mom ended up getting help from family back home in Russia, and she ended up being able to rent a flat in a town nearby where it was like an empty flat, no furniture, nothing. But I remember being able to stay there for, I think it was a few months whilst they were like still back in the old house. And I just remember sleeping on the floor in like a sleeping bag next to the radiator and just like trying to like go to college and do my studies and trying to keep it together. And yeah, it was a very like sort of isolating period of time as well for me where I felt very like, I mean, it's hard to describe. I just felt numb. I didn't even feel abandoned at that point. I didn't really know how to feel anymore. And this is, I must also mention, I started to get really bad panic attacks as well. So at this point, like some other physical symptoms kicked in. Whereas in my childhood, there was a lot of more stomach and physical pains. In my adolescence, due to alcohol and drug use, I started to get more mental symptoms like panic attacks because we know they can actually induce those states as well. So certainly didn't help. So yes, I started to get quite bad panic attacks, like hallucinatory panic attacks as well. So very scary, like incidents of hallucinations and visions that I had when I was under influence. Um, yeah, so my own state was definitely worsening. And yeah, it just, at that point, I was just so numb. And I think I carried that numbness into university. So I then went to university and I showed up from a space of kind of dissociation, I must say. So even though I finally felt that sense of like freedom and independence because I got to like live by myself in halls, but I definitely carried everything from my past. So again, my behaviors in terms of coping carried on. Like I was abusing alcohol a lot and definitely living in a lot of numbness, not being able to process what was going on. And then my relationships ended up following patterns where I got into relationships that were also extremely unhealthy for me, which were mirroring a lot of my situations with my stepdad, because as we know, what you're used to, you then carry on and you tend to. So yeah, I got into relationships that mirrored it, I guess to try and figure out why it happened or trying to fix, like get some sort of justification for the situation. Was in very healthy relationship, felt entrapped again by living with one of my ex-partners. And that all carried on for quite some time. And even carried on into my work life. So this is now bringing me into my sort of mid-20s, so about 25. I then decided to go into mental health work. So I did my master's. I started my master's in psychiatric research, and I also started working in mental health hospitals. Again, I guess to try and understand people and also to try and like help people, but a lot of my own patterns carried out. And in terms of survival mode, it only got worse in those situations because I had no sense of looking after myself. I had no sense of rest and no sense of being able to stop because I wanted to like be perfect, to do everything the best. In those sort of environments, they make it worse because those sort of environments are already very demanding in terms of your energy, in terms of workload, and they put unrealistic expectations on you. So for someone who's an overachiever anyway, I added to that. So it was extremely not healthy for me. Like I ended up barely eating throughout the day, going on like 5 coffees a day, eating a huge meal before bed to sort of, knock myself out. Also going out drinking to help myself with processing the trauma of what was currently happening too at work, because, working in mental health, there's a lot that happens. So there's a lot of vicarious trauma too. So it's kind of adding on top of my own traumas and not really having the space to let it out. This was, again, once again, the coping mechanism to use. And yeah, so a lot of that then carried over into even the most previous job, which was working at a prison, which then actually was to try and like helping people with addiction. So I then went and worked within it because, well, I've been through it and also it felt dear to my heart. And even in those environments where it was no longer 12-hour shifts like at the mental hospital, but it was 9 to 5, and yet still that survival mode was so strongly carried out from my whole life and from the working those patterns where my nervous system was already on such alert from being in that environment that it just carried over. Because, well, working in mental health hospitals in general, you have to be on guard. Like I worked in very intensive psychiatric units where, you might get attacked at any point. You have to be on alert. You have to like look out. But being in that state all day where it's adaptive, then it's like my switch just didn't get switched off ever. So like I did not know how to rest. So I ended up carrying that over into my 9 to 5 job where sure, at a prison, you also have to absolutely be on guard all the time because, things could happen. But even after work hours at night, I couldn't sleep. Like there was no switch button. It was just constantly on. I was constantly hypervigilant. I was constantly in adrenalized state of wanting to run away, of needing to like do something. So it was this constant sensations of like shakiness. And yeah, like my lifestyle wasn't adding to it. Like again, my eating was not very good. I was having so much coffee. I was smoking as well at that point. So all these things I was doing were adding to my already very sensitive nervous system. So yeah, my condition got progressively worse in terms of my health. I just could not sleep, and I started to get really bad anxiety and depression again with like mental health kicked in. So then I got placed on medication to try and help me ease with how I was feeling, because I think at that point I was literally crying like most days. After work, before work, I was waking up feeling like I don't want to be here. um, so yeah, and it got to a point where my body just said no. My body just said, we can't do this anymore. And I had to leave work and I had to leave everything and I had to reevaluate my life. And at that point, where my body went into complete collapse mode, so it was like the other survival mode, right? I went out of fight or flight constantly. I just went into total collapse where everything got shut down. And that was it. Like I could barely do anything. I had no energy. I was numb. I was in this state of total just laying there. So yeah, I was bedbound for almost a year. Like my body was just like, that's it. We need to reevaluate. But this was the big turning point. Like this was the big turning point where I figured out that I can't do it like this anymore. Like I can't do life like this anymore. That I just needed something to change. And I stopped waiting for someone else to change it for me. Like I stopped waiting for someone else to come or for life to come and give me a good day. I realized that it was up to me. I realized that it was, even though it was what I went through, like my reactions now are very much was a reflection of that, and that I was the only one that was going to save myself. So rather than trying to save everyone else, I needed to try and save myself first. And yeah, this is where I got into alternative therapies as well, because I didn't get much help from the system in my situation, because I don't know, at least in this country, for what I can speak, is the system was very much, putting out fires rather than preventative care. So when I came and said, like, this is what I'm going through, I'm having severe episodes of like panic attacks again, of like seizures and like flashbacks and all this trauma happening, and I've been on medication. The only solution was really like more medication. Like so I had to fight for myself to be seen by a psychiatrist, to get blood tests done, which was suggested by the psychiatrist, by the way, not even the general practitioner. And yeah, after that, I got after private care as well. I must say, I had to then eventually go and pay for extra support in private care. I got diagnosed with an autoimmune condition, so like hypothyroidism, which is where your thyroid is underactive, basically, which is actually now quite linked to a lot of nervous system dysregulation in people. So, yeah, I now see it as my body's way of saying that, I gave you signals, and at the end, it just had to force me to really change and to take a step back. And this is what happened. And yeah, I started looking into trauma from a new perspective, from a new lens. So, not from the perspective that I was taught, and not from the perspective that I was seeing done, but from a more body-based approaches. And that really got it all together for me. Like that really, like it was like flashbulb moment. Like I was reading these books on trauma and it was all starting to make sense. It all started to come together like in my own healing when I started to delve into it from the perspective of looking just beyond the mind and looking into the body. And this is where I came towards somatic healing. So I ended up doing some extra online courses and getting some support through online programs. And that really, really helped me in my healing journey, not only in just nervous system regulation and stabilizing, but it also really helped me in processing a lot of the trauma that I went through, which I'm still doing. There's a lot, so it's an ongoing process. But at least now I can say that I wake up every day and I'm excited. I'm like, okay, what's the day gonna bring, And I feel like I now know how to balance myself to show up in the world in a way that I couldn't before. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of my journey.
You touched on a lot, and I appreciate that, particularly around the coping mechanisms that we tend to pick up, right? You named a few, the drinking, the drugs, the promiscuity. But what other coping mechanisms have you seen with people who are in survival mode?
Yeah, I think food is a big one as well because food tends to be one of the few things that, say, even looking back at childhood, we have control over, right? So it's like as a child, you're pretty much dependent on your environment, on your caregivers, and food is one of the few aspects that we can actually control. So that tends to carry over into adulthood and tends to be almost like a feeling of comfort, of control for a lot of people. And that can come out in so many ways in different scales. But yeah, that's definitely a big one as well.
Mhm.
Similar with exercise, actually, I think this one's not talked about too much, but people can get very like addicted to exercising in a ways that aren't actually that healthy for themselves. And it's like it's another way of numbing out and pushing past their own boundaries and their own physical capacity because again they're not as in tune with what their body might actually need. A lot of these, are sort of easily hidden behind societal norms and expectations, same as sexual promiscuity and alcohol, right?
I
So,
smile because I talk a lot on this podcast about awareness. And I think that is the first step in exiting survival mode. And I smile because I think a lot of people are unaware of the residual impacts of trauma. They're unaware of how it shows up. They're unaware of the patterns they adapt as a result of what they've been through. So when we're talking about, okay, yeah, the drinking and the drugs, yeah, I think everybody's like, yeah, people
you
who are
know.
traumatized probably drink and do more drugs than the average person. But
Mm,
the other impacts are not often talked about, right? Like I can relate to almost everything that you said here. The drinking, I would find myself at the bottom of a bottle and I didn't
mm,
even like the alcohol I was drinking. Didn't even like being drunk, but that was the easiest way to escape. Dude, definitely. At one point in time, I was almost 400 pounds
mm,
because I relied on having control there. Like it was the one thing I can control. And even though I wasn't controlling it, it was still mine, right?
mhm.
The promiscuity, maybe not the gym part, but like just getting obsessed with things to numb what's going on in my
Yeah.
mind, right? I think
Hmm.
it's really important. And this is one of the reasons why we're having these conversations because, again, without the awareness, we can continue in these patterns for a very, very long time. Now, what I found interesting, if I'm honest about your story, is you were working in mental health. Like you have a master's. So, did you identify with being in survival mode as you were going through that phase?
No, no, not at
Uh,
all. That's the thing. I was working in these environments and I couldn't see or identify what was going on with myself.
mhm. And why do you think that is? Because oftentimes I can see what's going on with somebody else, but I can't see what's going on with me. Why is it that you think that we tend to be blind to our habits and patterns that essentially highlight that we're in survival mode?
I can only speak to myself. I think for me, in reflection now, thinking back, I was addicted to the stress and the chronic activation of that stress, of the adrenaline, the cortisol, the dopamine hits, the drama, like everything. The coping behaviors I had, they brought drama into my life. And again, looking back into it, I've always been like, oh, why am I always the one that drama happens to? Why does this always happen? But it's because I was seeking it out unintentionally and being unaware of it. It was like it became another drug. So all of it was like I wasn't ready to let go of it. And so even working in mental health, I think it was easy for me to hide behind having a high functioning life in terms of while I show up for work, I do a job that's, maybe even seen as like respectful and all this, but yet internally all this is going on. And it was easier for me to just show up in life and put on like a mask and do something that appears that I have my life together when underneath everything was crumbling because I wasn't ready to really reflect and let go of that state of being in chaos because chaos felt like safety to me. Chaos felt home. And that's just how I was ready to carry on my life until there came a point where I just had to say, I'm just not sure how far in life I'm going to get in chaos. And even though safety, like real safety, was the one that felt un like unbearable and almost like unfamiliar, I had to start to open the door to it because I just knew that I wasn't going to be around for much longer if I carried on the path I was going down. So I chose to almost experiment. I chose to open up that door and to see what life could be like without so much chaos and to see if maybe a different way of living could also be pleasurable in a different way, where no longer the pain brought the dopamine, right? But the pleasure
Mhm.
brought the dopamine. So to me, that's my understanding of it, of my own situation.
I love that you said it because it's been talked about previously on this podcast. I've talked about it, other people have talked about it. Our brain is phenomenally amazing. But what happens is we get used to, like, when we are living in chaos, and like you, my chaos was ripe from very young and it continued for decades, right? I didn't know what peace was. Like, peace to me was like, uh, just a buzzword. And when I had spaces where I was in healthy situations, when I wasn't like chronically stressed, there was this craving
Yeah.
for drama. Like something else has to happen here. Like this cannot be life. Like I am so damn bored. Like what is going on? But that's essentially what happens. If we are living in fight and flight for decades, our brain thinks that's normal.
Mhm.
So what happens is when we are not in those spaces, the brain is like, wait a minute, this isn't home. So it then starts looking for what we know as normal. And it's really difficult without a conscious decision to rewrite that narrative because if like I'm physically craving to be in a state of adrenaline, like I'm craving it. So what do? I seek opportunities that are going to put me in those spaces.
Mhm.
What I found also interesting is the fact that you were aware of how trauma shows up in your body, and for some reason, you well, not some, based on what was said, you were addicted to that state. Why do you think somatics
Mm.
has helped over anything else that you've done? And I've talked about, alternative modalities on the show. So tell me why somatics is different.
Well, for one, to me now, hopefully it's tending towards more mainstream, right? Because it's now there's so much research to actually show in terms of trauma being stored in the body. So it is in terms of like releasing what's stored has to happen through the body. But for me, I think the biggest piece is that I've always seen my body as something that's not under my control. So because of the traumas I went through, I saw my body as for everyone else. So it's almost like I can only offer up my body, and then that's when people will value me in terms of relationships and in terms of like I can't control what happens to my body again because of everything I went through. Like I don't have a say. So having this complete disconnection and dissociation from my body where it didn't feel like a part that I can have any influence over, I just tried to treat it as I try to approach it from a place of my mind will try to control it. So I try to go from a place of I'm going to try and become like the ruler of the body, just like my trauma had done, just like everyone else had done. But somatics brings us into a place where we become the body's friend. Like we're no longer trying to dominate or control it. We really listen to what the body needs. Like we listen to what our internal physical states need when we need that rest, when we need that nurture, when we need to address whatever is coming up, rather than trying to push through like what happens when we only focus on the mind. Because the mind is super important too. I just think that all the elements combined is where the magic is. It's like when you're not leaving anything behind. So for me, somatics was really coming into this realization of I can be a friend to my body, I can be a friend to my mind, and then that's how I can connect to my true self, right? Like my soul is how I see it. So, like, it completely changed my mindset in terms of I no longer tried to push through. I then just listened to what I needed. And even now, even still, like I'm very much in like a sensitive state, I will say, in terms of physically, like my energies are still recovering. And every day, I'm running my own business, I have a practice, and yet still every day, there's points where I'm like, today I'm going to need a lot more rest. I'm going to need a lot more of just nurturing and processing whatever's coming up for me, and I allow it to happen. I don't let anything else get in the way. I don't let anything else take priority because I know that now myself and my body take priority. So it's very much completely shifting that state. Because when we only try and focus on the mind, we try and control the body, and that means we're never really listening to our needs. So to me, that's why it was the huge shift that I needed.
Mhm. And it's interesting you say that because the body warns us heavily as
Yeah.
we journey through. And it
Yeah.
isn't until we learn to tap into that we can really start, making shifts because, again, that awareness. Listen,
Mhm.
I do need this rest, or maybe I need to remove myself from stimuli that is impacting me physically and emotionally. But it often is a journey. And I hope, by listening to your story, the listeners actually start listening to or trying to listen to, because again, it's still a journey as well to
Mhm.
understand what our body's telling us, but start tapping into that. Daria, this conversation has been amazing, and I really have enjoyed how you were able to explain how culture played a role in your survival mode, how your stress and your trauma was showing up in your body, the different coping mechanisms,
Mhm.
why an alternative to talk therapy was helpful for you. So,
Yeah.
how can the listeners connect with you?
So you can find me on my website, enlightenedsoultribe.com, or on Instagram, same Enlightened Soul Tribe, or on Facebook, Daria Lebedeva. Yeah, connect with me, see what I do, and yeah, obviously if this resonates, just come and see my content, and hopefully there'll be some more useful stuff there for you. But yeah.
Yes, please do. And all of that information will be in the show notes. So, one takeaway for the listeners today, Daria.
I'd say that if you're having that sort of question of when will this end? Like, when will life give me a good day or break? Just know that you can choose that for yourself at any point. Like, you can choose to start to show up in life differently and to start to shift your reality, that it is under your control, no one else's.
I love that. And listeners, thank you so much for catching another episode of Survival Mode Disrupted. As always, I want to remind you, you were not built to break, but you damn sure were not built just to survive. Disrupt the cycle, reclaim your life, and thrive on your own terms. And I will see you next week.